everybody. Hello, I'm Steve Crony. I am your Sergeant at Arms today. It's a long story how that came about. Actually, Linda Sanders was scheduled to be your Sergeant at Arms. She's going to be your Sergeant at Arms next week. When Saul Aronson was scheduled to be Sergeant at Arms, but Saul is in no condition to do anything right now. And being your Sergeant at Arms chair, thought, well, I should stand in, but I'm going to be out of town next week. So Linda took it for the team and pushed back, and here I am without anything to say. So, where are you? It's funny, I wish I had been able to prepare something after meeting with Jess and Alice Whitman at the start of this meeting, and all the talk about wrestling, which evolved to roller derby. I could have really gotten it on, but can't do it. So instead, I'm guessing everyone here remembers all the panic associated with Y2K. Our computers were going to crash, the stock market was going to crash, our cars were going to crash. The world as we knew it was coming to an end. And after all that dreaded anticipation, clocks everywhere struck midnight. 1999 came to a close. Surprise, surprise. Like always, the ball dropped at Times Square, the acorn plummeted in Raleigh, and the earth did not fall off its axis. Nothing much happened. Life went on as usual. The world celebrated that the rumors of the world's demise were overstated. I had this feeling that they were indestructible after that. Even East Chapel Hill Rotary threw abandon to the wind, let down its guard, and in that year of 2000, they admitted me to the club. What were you thinking? All right, rather than a blessing today, I'm going to give a bit of advice, such as it is. Fairy tales can come true. It can happen to you if you're young at heart. For it's hard, you will find, to be narrow of mind if you're young at heart. You can go to extremes, with impossible schemes. You can laugh when your dreams fall apart at the seams. And life gets more exciting with each passing day, and love is either in your heart or it's on the way. Don't you know that it's worth every treasure on earth to be young at heart? For as rich as you are, it's much better by far to be young at heart. So I hope everyone is young at heart. I wrote that. So we have guests.
Filling in for the other champ here at here for the third time. I have my grandson Holden right here.
All right.
I have my friend Tom Dine, who is on the board with me at 2 Wheels for 80.
I have my grandson Henry, whose father many Rob Ford.
Oh, you are not as wild as your father used to be, are you? Any other guests? Yes.
It's Ryan Farrell, all the way from Emerald Isle, North Carolina.
All right. We have a place to stay at the beach when we want. Any other guests? Visiting Rotarians? Okay, let me start the time backstage. Okay, so the rules of etiquette were a bit more lax than today by the time I became a member of this club. But East Chapel Hill had changed from its roots already, because it was known to be the raucous good old boys club. And it came somewhat by the time I joined in 2000. I know you find it hard to believe, but we have some of the ringleaders of those wild times, even pre-Rob Warren, are with us today. Some are still members, but not here today. But for instance, I don't think Wild Bill White is here, is he?
Yes.
He is. Wild Bill. All right. Jim Dandy. They wrote a song about Jim Dandy Hebner. Daring Dickie Bador.
Bill White's a lot of things, but he is not wild.
Bob Bad Boy Page.
Yeah.
And we have Rowdy Russ Hapgood. Rowdy Russ. And at the same table, Mike the Menace Maxwell. These guys, they were rough. They were rough crew. And it's funny, so when I joined the club in 2000, it was a good number of years after George Carlin had introduced his probably most famous comedy routine, the 7 words you can't say on TV. It was kind of ironic because the airwaves were really censored back then. But at Rotary, you could say anything. I mean, proof in the pudding, camel jokes by Al Friend. Am I right? I am right. Now, we're much more sensitive, and I might add sensible. And we temper what we say. Meanwhile, if George Carlin were alive, we'd have to get a new routine because all those words that you couldn't say on TV, you hear every day. So, I mean, things change. But I think it's important to learn from history. History does, as they say, tend to repeat itself. What goes around comes around. Every time things come back in style. With that in mind. I can assure you that the closet full of neckties I have, which haven't been touched in years, will remain in place under a remote chance that they come back in style. Well, we'll take that. I'll have to be invited somewhere where I actually need to wear a tie. I don't know if that anymore. And assuming those two things happen, I'll be calling most of you guys, sorry ladies, I'll start with guys, asking if anyone remembers how to tie one of them so they can help me. Anyhow, I got nothing else. So President Tim.
Thank you, Steve. That was great. First order of business is an induction today, a very special induction. So I will bring Linda and our inductee up. Oh, thank you, buddy. You're not going to go. Sorry about that.
That's why I'm dressed up. Figured it out. Fellow Rotarians, it's the duty of our Rotary Club to add new members from time to time, so that we may not only increase our usefulness and influence as a club, but also to extend the spirit of Rotary throughout our community and indeed our world. Today, we welcome to our ranks and into membership Mayor Jess Anderson, and her sponsor is Linda. All right. Rotary is an international organization of business and professional people with more than 33,000 Rotary clubs in over 200 countries. Jess, I wish to impress upon you that you've been admitted not only to the Rotary Club of East Chapel Hill, but to a worldwide association of over 1.3 million like-minded business and professional leaders. With the pin that you've already received, you're entitled to travel throughout the world, find a Rotary Club within easy distance, and be warmly welcomed by fellow Rotarians. Even though the languages may be different, the food unusual, and location far from home. Jess, the honor and privilege of Rotary membership also carries with it duties and obligations. You will be expected to attend our club's meetings regularly, to enthusiastically perform your share of club duties, attend our club's meetings regularly, and to enthusiastically perform your share of club service with our teacher supply store, youth services, monthly family house dinners, bike night, San Diego, Guatemala Dental and Service Mission, and other causes, to actively participate in our fellowship activities like our holiday party, Valentine's lunch, steak night, and pop-up events, and to place your knowledge and talents at the disposal of the club. Always remember Rotary's menu, Rotary's motto. I'm still hungry. Service above self. Our goal in Rotary is to encourage and foster, first, the development of fellowship as an opportunity for service. Second, high ethical standards in business and professions. Third, dignifying each Rotarian with an opportunity to serve society. And fourth, the advancement of international understanding, goodwill, and peace through a world of people united in the ideal of service and fellowship. Rotary challenge you to live by the Rotary four-way test in all you say or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Do you accept this challenge and commitment?
Yep.
Then I, please members stand. As we ask all members to stand and rise, Mayor Jess Anderson, in the name of Rotary Club of East Chapel Hill, it is now my honor and privilege to formally admit you to membership in our club and to ask your sponsor, Linda Sanders, who has already affixed your emblem pin to your lapel. Congratulations. Round of applause, please. Now, if you don't mind, just give a minute or two, a little bit about who you are, your background, your family, etc.
Good afternoon. I've been here before, and you can just look on the website for the town if you want to know kind of the administrivia about me, but I'll take just a very brief moment to tell you things that you might not know. First is that I am married to my husband, Karthik. His last name is Sham, mine is not. Our children are Elena and Nico. They are 8 and 11. My husband was born in Chennai in South India, and his parents moved to Saskatchewan when he was about 6 months old, so they had a bit of a culture shock. We have lived in North Carolina since 2007. I am a policy analyst, and I also teach at UNC. I'm a professor of the practice in the policy department, so we're starting back on Monday, which is exciting. And then my entering middle schooler and my elementary school student are going back the week after. I think, Jennifer, you're about to be in it as well. And I served on the Chapel Hill Council for 8 years before becoming mayor this past year. I think it's a great combination of Rotary and other public service. I think those things intertwine really nicely. You all can hold me to high ethical standards as mayor and as a Rotarian. I will do both. I really enjoy public service. That's the way I grew up. I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My mom comes from a very large New York Jewish family, and my dad comes from a very small, waspy Massachusetts family. Their marriage didn't make it, but that's okay. I am now married to an Indian from a very large family, and the Indians and the Jews get along just fine, so we're great. But I am very pleased to be here with you, and I hope you'll take the opportunity of me being here. It's a great opportunity for me to have one other kind of touch point with folks in the community. So if you have questions, And please don't hesitate to run things by me, and I'd love to share things once in a while with folks casually, just so you can know what's going on in town, because it's really hard to get people to know what we're doing. But I am really pleased to be here, and thank you for the warm welcome.
And several people have asked me, they have some questions for Jess. What about my high taxes? Is Franklin Street ever going to be 4 lanes again? Let's make sure that we also respect Jess's space and not ask her questions like that this week. Next week's another week. Thanks, man.
Well, glad you're with us. Yes. I do. I want to I don't know if we've officially welcomed Ian Conniff back to the fold. He was a Rotarian. A couple of years back. So we're glad you're back with the ranks too, Ian. And I grew up with his guest Brian, and Steve. Don't worry, I've already told him that there's a satellite ECHR in Emerald Isle. So we'll be visiting, Brian. Karen, Lillian, you have an announcement, right?
Yeah. As many of you know, Priscilla Arulpadasam arrived a couple of weeks ago, or maybe just 10 days ago, from Sri Lanka as a Rotary Peace Fellow. And this club did an outstanding job of coming together and helping her move her and her roommate into their apartment this past weekend. So for those of you who didn't, please stand. Linda, Liz, who I don't see, Peggy, Pete, Tom, Felix, who are we missing? We're missing Lorenzo, we're missing Christy, and Lorenzo, who is moving his son to Texas this weekend. And Lorenzo not only came himself, but brought his nice brawny son and another friend. So it was great.
And the tool set.
And the tool, and Lorenzo's extensive knowledge of tools and putting together IKEA beds.
It took around about 15 minutes.
So anyway, that was great. The girls were really appreciative.
I'm sure. Thank you for doing that effort. You made our Peace Fellow feel very welcome, I'm sure. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be there. I do have photos of that. I meant to put them up on the screen today, but if you look in the scuttlebutt, you can find those. Does anyone else have any announcements? Yes.
Say something about Teacher Supply.
That's my last announcement. Thank you, Steve. Yes, Teacher Supply Store is this week, Tuesday and Wednesday. It's not too late to volunteer. Wednesday, Thursday. I'll send one more announcement about it. But it's not too late to volunteer. There's a link, and I can send that link one more time, maybe tomorrow or this afternoon. Some folks who expressed they cannot volunteer wondered if they could financially contribute, and absolutely. They are always looking for financial support to buy the supplies that they need. I think when Maddie and Allison were here, they noted that when they first started the store, it was $450 or $500 out of pocket for the teachers. It's now $900 to $1,000. So every little bit helps. But we look very forward to the event, and it's always special. And again, we're serving all teachers, not just one or another cohort. So without further ado, Jen, you come up and Mark.
Hello, everybody. We're going to be doing a bit of a different format today, as we have two different speakers with us. So we're going to do a little bit of a Q&A interview type, and then obviously, as always, we will open it up to everyone else. But I wanted to just mention, so this past week, I was scrolling on Facebook, as one does when they're killing time, and I came across this photo of a friend of mine who lives in Raleigh, Anna Claire Murnick Price, and it caused me to stop. And I was like, is that Anna Claire? She must be, she's obviously a young child. And I thought, who is that man? He kind of looks familiar. Anybody know who that is? And then I think this is Anna Claire's brother. Also, with, who knows who that is?
Andre the Giant.
Andre the Giant. So, I knew that we had an opening this week in our program, and so I reached out. Anna Claire put me in touch with Cliff, who then brought in his co-producer Chris, and we have a great program lined up for you today. So like I said, I'm going to ask a few questions just to get us started, and then we'll open it up to everybody else. But as y'all are making it to the stage, I'm going to quickly show the trailer for their documentary, which is called When Giants Walked Here. That'll give you some context for the conversation. I know we sent the scuttlebutt out a little late. So enjoy this trailer, and then we'll have a bit of a session with Cliff and Chris. We need a little more volume.
The NWA returns to Raleigh and the Rotary with a super spectacular guard. Dorton was a real magical place.
It was the only place in Eastern North Carolina that you could have wrestling.
The ticket prices were $2 and $3, but they would have 5,000 people. You could feel it in the crowd. It really was almost like a religion.
Dorton Arena grew to be one of the most important venues for Crockett promotions.
It just was evident. You know, in some cases, we felt invincible, and it came to bite us.
What the heck's going on here now? You know, we ain't going to Raleigh?
They left Dorton Arena. They left the wrestling fans.
The fans never forgave them. They felt betrayed. I don't think fans realize the people that were losing jobs.
For years, there would always be rumors of like, so-and-so's going to run Dorton Arena. Don't tell anybody, but 6 or 8 months from now, there's going to be this big show at Dorton Arena, and then it would never materialize.
Somebody messaged me and said, your dream may be getting ready to come true.
There's a lot of wrestling starting to come back.
Those fans are coming back to appreciate what was created for them.
It's like full circle. It's almost like, coming home again.
All right, come on up. So I'm going to do this to make yourself comfortable. And I probably know the least of anyone in the room about professional wrestling, so it's going to be really interesting. But wanted you to just start by telling us how you started working together and what inspired you to do this documentary.
Yeah, absolutely. So hey y'all, thanks for welcoming us. I'm Cliff Bumgardner. I'm a filmmaker out of Raleigh. My company, Slugline Media, produced the movie you just saw the trailer for. And yeah, I'm born and raised in Raleigh and growing up around here. As many of you probably know, I don't think being a wrestling fan is a choice. It just kind of comes with the territory. And so I grew up a huge wrestling fan most of my life. And later years, I started my company. I was making documentaries, was looking for something to get into. And I always loved Dorton Arena. Growing up in Raleigh, seeing Dorton Arena, was always interested in history, knew there used to be wrestling there. And when we started researching it, we thought this was going to be 10 minutes. That was 3 years ago. And now it's a full-fledged piece on PBS. So it's been a pretty incredible ride. I worked for WRL for 2 years, and very briefly, Chris and I crossed paths. He can tell you more about this, but he started right at the beginning of COVID. So we never actually worked in the same building, but even so, when you're in a huge company, it doesn't matter how big it is, and another wrestling fan starts, people let you know about it. They make sure that you know, and so we knew of each other at that point, and I reached out to him and just said, hey, I've got this idea. Would you want to be involved? It'll be 5 minutes, it'll be on YouTube, really low stress, and now here we are. So you can pick it up from there.
Hey everybody, is this on? It's good?
Yeah.
My name is Chris Lee. I'm a sports anchor at WRL. I'll be on tonight at 6, 10, and 11 o'clock, and I don't know, maybe I've got some emails from some of you guys saying I'm talking about NC State too much. So, maybe if that's cool, we can probably try to smooth it over today. But no, yeah, I started at WRAL the week before the pandemic hit. March 4th, 2020 was my first day. And so it was a very weird time, but I knew coming into WRAL, I put pro wrestling on my resume. I used to be a pro wrestler. Even though I've been a journalist for 20 years, in the middle when I had some layoffs and I didn't know where my career was going, I became a pro wrestler. And when I
What was your pro wrestling name?
This is the part that always disappoints people. It's Chris Lee. I think everybody's always looking for like the Crusher or something like that. But there's a reason for that. When I was based in Greensboro at the time, and I was on the news at WXI, and I was on radio there as well. So it was just, to me, it made sense to have the branding, all around. I knew coming into WRAL, they had a large history of pro wrestling. I wanted to do something with wrestling there as a former pro wrestler and knowing all the history around this area. And the pandemic, really stopped a lot of that because, as soon as I got there, I met everybody. Then the next week, everybody went home. And there's still some people I haven't seen since because they've either stopped working there or their job roles have kind of changed and they don't necessarily need to be in the office. And then when I got email from Cliff in 2021 saying, hey, do you want to work on this wrestling thing? It was like a godsend. So, he asked me to be a part of it, and it's my first foray into documentary work. I ended up having a documentary come out last year with WRAL called Ghosts in the Stadium. And so now we've worked on this one, and it's had some good reception so far, and we're excited to share everything with you guys today.
So Chris, you mentioned a bit of what drew you to that was the knowing the history of wrestling in this area. So maybe tell us about why was Raleigh or this area so special for pro wrestling back in the day?
Absolutely. So I'm from North Carolina. I'm from Greensboro originally. My dad is from Castle County in Yanceyville. So when he was a kid, he would always go to wrestling events in Greensboro and also in Raleigh at Dorton. So it's kind of in the middle of both places. And so I was familiar with going to wrestling at Greensboro Coliseum. He'd always talk about what was going on at Dorton as well. And I have some aunts that live in Raleigh, so he took me by and I got to see the Primo in the sky. That's the way I saw it when I was a kid. And so I knew that that's where, before there was a large national company, there was the territory system where it was basically your at-home wrestling company. They were based out of Charlotte, and every week they'd come to Raleigh, Greensboro, Charlotte, and other places around the Mid-Atlantic. And so I got a chance to hear about that. Also on the other side, my mom's dad, my mom's from Danville, Virginia. He'd come down to Durham to sell his tobacco, and then take a stop over to Raleigh to see some wrestling before going back up to Virginia. So I got a chance to hear about it from both sides. And my favorite thing growing up when my paternal grandfather started getting Alzheimer's, he'd be moody about certain things and forget about a lot of things, but I could always say, even after watching 3 hours of wrestling, hey Grandpa, you want to put on some wrestling? I'm like, you know what, I do want to watch it. So I was able to spend lots of afternoons with him just watching wrestling that way and seeing him come alive, and kind of imagine what that would have been like when he was taking my dad to Dorton.
What would you add based on the research you've done on, and specifically what made Dorton Arena so special with wrestling?
Well, the era that we talk about, starting the 1960s all the way through the 80s, for a lot of that period, you have to think about pro wrestling was legitimately the biggest sport in North Carolina. This is before the Charlotte Hornets are here. This is before the Panthers are here. You've got pro wrestling and NASCAR. Were basically the two sort of institutions, and that's funny to think about now. With how big sports are here and everything we have. So being like Chris said, that it was local. It was your people in your town. It was people that you would see at the grocery store, and then you'd see them on TV, and then you'd see them at Dorton Arena. It created a personal connection that people still have with wrestling to this day. One of the things for us in making the movie, we knew that, and the research has showed that. Since making the movie, and particularly since it's been out the last couple of weeks, the people who have come out of the woodwork, Chris says all the time, everybody has a wrestling story. Like everybody comes out and has some connection to it, whether they're a fan, whether they've been to the show or not. Like Chris said, it'll be I watched with my grandpa, I watching my grandmother, watching my dad. This was what my family bonded over. We always had to do it. And so it becomes this institution and this really personal connection for people that you don't get in a lot of other things. And the scale of it meant, people did feel like it was theirs, and they had this sense of ownership over it. And then also on the other side of that, it was a massive business. Jim Crockett Promotions that promoted most of the shows in this area for decades and decades, in the 1980s had years where they grossed over $30 million. And that's just what they reported. So you can, and that doesn't.
This is being recorded, everybody.
and that doesn't take into account the people who sold merchandise, the people who sold the popcorn, and people. So this was, even if people aren't necessarily wrestling fans, what it meant from a business standpoint to North Carolina is massive, and it's something that for us, as working on film, has kind of gone unappreciated. We've been to Sports Hall of Fames, we've been to various museums all over the state, and every time I'm kind of like looking around for the wrestling stuff, and there's nothing there. And so for us, that was kind of another reason to do this, was just to show, even if you're not particularly a wrestling fan, what it has meant to our culture and our community is massive, and I think deserves kind of being put on that, put on that level.
Yeah. Yeah, my wrestling story is I have an older brother, and when I was playing Barbies, he was playing with figurines that he had bought that were pro wrestlers. So you, throughout the course of making this documentary, interviewed lots of different people, both from the production side and also from people who were pro wrestlers. So what were some of the most interesting stories you heard, or what were some of the, the tales from Dorton Arena or some of those matches that you can share with us?
I can share something that I learned afterwards, and you want to share something on the film. So going back to one thing that Cliff said, after this was announced and people knew it was coming on PBS, so many people came up with stories. Chip Alexander, who works at the Raleigh News and Observer, covers Carolina, all sports, came up to me a few weeks ago when we were in Charlotte at the ACC kickoff, and he was like, "I didn't know you were working on this film. I would have had the perfect story for you." In the late 70s, Joe Murnick, who, Anna Claire's grandfather, one of the promoters, would hand deliver that night's results to the News and Observer so they could run it the next day in the paper. And so there was one particular night, there was a snowstorm. After he delivered the results, the event was called off, but nobody told anybody at the News and Observer. So the next morning, people were at their papers seeing this guy beat that guy, and called up to the newspaper to say, "Wait a second, I didn't go to the event last night. I thought it was called up. What do you mean that there was wrestling last night?" And so that's when he was young, and he was working at the News and Observer. And so we get stories like that from people who have these vivid memories, whether they were going there, whether they covered it from a media perspective. But there's so many different stories that we've heard go around that touch so many different people. You want to say something?
Yeah, I would say this isn't so much a story that was told to us, but a story that we ourselves experienced in making the film. Last summer, or maybe summer 22, it's all blurred at this point. We got an opportunity to interview somebody some folks here may know, named the Boogie Woogie Man, Handsome Jimmy Dunn. Classic wrestler, came out of Tennessee, wrestled here for quite a long time. And he's not in the trailer, but he has a big appearance in the film. But he now owns a wrestling school and camp in Shawsville, right? Shawsville, Virginia. And so Chris and I set out one afternoon, got off work, and said, let's just go interview this guy. We drive 2.5, 3 hours up into Virginia, and when you get to this place, you can't miss it, because there's a compound on a hill that says along the side of one of the buildings, Camp Boogie. And we're like, I think we're here. We get out, we're starting to unload our gear in this parking lot, and actually when we first pull up, we don't see any human beings around. We're like, where are we? What's going on? There was a mail carrier there, and she sees us getting out of the car, and she just leans over and goes, y'all looking for Boogie? And I was like, yes ma'am, I think we are. I think that's what we're here to do. About that time, we look up on a hill, and there's this beautiful mountain house up on the hill, which is where he lives, above the wrestling school. And we look up, and this bearded, tattooed figure just steps out of the house and waves, and it was like seeing Bigfoot. Just in the distance, waving to us. And then we got to interview him. He was incredibly kind. Chris had actually wrestled as his teammate years
He was my tag team partner on Thanksgiving night.
And
in Asheboro, North Carolina.
we got to interview him in his ring, in his school. And it was just a really special experience. He ended up, if you don't watch the film, I'll give you this tease so that you make sure to stick around after the credits. He actually did a promo for us, looking in the camera and talking about a match that he was theoretically going to have at Dorton Arena. So it's a really special bit that we got, and that's one of the days of just like, what does this job allow us to do? But go see somebody called the Boogie Woogie Man in the mountains of Virginia. So one of my favorite stories.
Yeah. Well, talk to us a little bit about Dorton Arena. We saw in the trailer 1985. Dorton Arena's full. I think it was maybe 1992. It's completely empty. What happened?
So, Crockett Promotions was promoted in Dorton Arena, as Chris mentioned, was a territory-based wrestling company, and that meant that they had a region, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, that they sort of exclusively promoted, and it was their shows. That had been a system going on since the late 50s, and maybe even earlier in certain parts of the country. Every different part of the country would have their own wrestling territory. But then television comes around and goes national. And when television comes around, when all of a sudden entertainment becomes a national product, these local communities just have these local companies rather, have a really hard time keeping up with that and just putting on a product in their local area. And so you had companies that started buying up the territories. These days we know them as the WWE, or one of the big companies that was going in and would take over people's television, take their stars and kind of start grabbing and making it into a national product instead of a local product. Crockett Promotions was feeling some of that push at the time and started themselves to try to expand and to try to go national. It ended up not being financially a great decision because they were, at their peak. Crockett Promotions had like 5 or 6 full-time employees run out of an old convenience store in Charlotte. They were very much a family, home-run kind of business, even with the numbers they were doing. And so the accounting and things got out of hand. They ended up having to sell to Ted Turner. And when the company sells to Ted Turner, he takes it national. And the priority of going to these local communities that had made their business just wasn't there anymore. Now they wanted to go to Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, and these big markets where they can put on big shows and make all this money. Something that's even mentioned in the program today is, Dorton Arena didn't even have VIP boxes or premium seating. You couldn't, it was made to be equal. It was made to be, you buy your ticket, you can come see the show. These big television companies, that's not how they make their money. And so wrestling sort of starts leaving Dorton, and instead of getting the big shows with all the stars, you started getting much smaller shows. And the local fans just felt betrayed. I mean, that's something you see in the trailer is people just felt like, man, we made this. For 30 years, this was ours. This was what we were invested in our community here in town, and now it's, we're an afterthought. And in the mid-90s, WCW ran their last show that was there, and it would be over 20 years before wrestling would come back to Dorton, just because it was kind of like Dorton helped make a culture and a product and a community that sort of passed it by, unfortunately, and led to these dark years.
So I'm going to ask one more question here, and then we'll open it up. So so get your questions ready. But so what can you tell us about the status of either pro wrestling or Dorton Arena today? And also, this is for Mr. Hebner, who I talked to a lot about this program. Is wrestling a sport or is it entertainment?
So there's a few times a year there's been shows at Dorton Arena. There's nothing that I've seen this year there so far, but I know that some of the clips that you saw in there was a show that we were able to go in and shoot at the end of 2022. I want to believe December 2022 to get some of that that comeback to Dorton Arena. And I am under the belief that wrestling is a sport and it's entertainment. I used to be a theater kid in high school and also wrestled in high school, and pro wrestling put that together for me because it was all the same. There's definitely a sports aspect to it. You have to train. You just don't go into the ring and just start performing. You have to be in wrestling shape. I've been asked to come back to wrestling. As a matter of fact, I didn't tell you this, I was asked to be a part of a battle royal next week in Greensboro. And I politely declined because I have a little bit of a and I don't know if my old tights would fit me or if people want to see me in my old tights. And you know, you really do have to train for it and make sure that you're in shape. There is a such thing as wrestling shape. You can't just, you know, run your way to get into shape for it. But it's also entertainment at the same time because there are storylines, there are, you know, there are theatrical aspects to it, and it is predetermined. I don't use the F word. It's predetermined. My real concussions and real knee injuries and real jaw dislocations won't allow me to use the F word. But you know, it's both. To answer that question.
All right, we're going to start with Bob, who's hand us all first, and then Tim's going to pass the mic around.
Okay, this sort of plays into Lee's comment. Who determines who's going to win, and do they have a producer who tells them when the time is up for their match?
So the booker or the promoter, whoever is the person that's putting on the show that night, typically has an idea for the direction that he wants things to go. And so that will be the person who will determine who wins, who loses, that type of thing. You typically find out, if it's just a regular match, maybe it's when you get to the building, you'll find out what your assignment is for your day, what's going to happen. And you go with your opponent to figure out what the match is going to look like. Inside the ring, this is, I guess, breaking the fourth wall a little bit. The referee has a lot to do with the communication going on between both wrestlers that people just don't see. The referee is actually the person giving them kind of the directions. I wouldn't say a producer, but they're getting the feedback from somebody.
They have a producer in their ear.
They have a producer in their
He's in the
ear,
back.
letting them know they have 2 minutes left in this match, or the camera is going to be on that side, tell them to do this over there. You know, things like that. So, sorry to break that to you if that wrong. Next time we watch wrestling.
If you didn't know already.
Yeah, the next time we watch wrestling, you know, SmackDown is on Fox 15 tonight before WRL News at 10 o'clock. Little plug. Maybe catch some of that. You know, see that.
While I walk over to Marvin, to your point about the referee, right? I felt for them in the documentary because in Dorton, there's no AC. Yes. And in the summertime, it's hot.
Yes.
And they would go clear across the building to each. And then if he didn't like what was going on, he'd have to go and tell the other wrestler, right?
Yeah, to give context to that, so back in the day, when wrestling was even more protected than it is today, you didn't have good guys and bad guys together. They didn't ride in the same car together, and they certainly weren't in the same locker room because somebody could see that. And so in Dorton, the two locker rooms, like for opposing teams, are on other sides of the building. So the only person who could communicate or could be seen by the fans going to locker rooms is the referee. So there's actually a story, and several different people told us the story for the film, of referees having to go back and forth. And so they might go to Chris and go, okay, Cliff wants to do this, are you cool with that? He goes, no, I'm not cool with that, go tell him to do something else. So the referee's got to go to the other end of the building and say, Chris isn't going to do it, he's going to do this. And he goes, no, you tell him to go do this. And so the referees would go back and forth all night long because the wrestlers usually in that era would not communicate until they were standing in the ring together. That's the first time they would see each other that day in a lot of instances. And actually start the match. There was a lot of improvisation, and to Chris's point, the referee was even more important at that time.
There are those of us that, it's kind of Southern culture, I guess. I can remember watching wrestling as a little kid with my grandfather. But I also remember when we got to Chapel Hill in school, it became a culture for a lot of fraternities. We'd go to Raleigh on Wednesday night for the filming at WRAF. You didn't talk about the fact that it went from Dorton Arena to your own studio. So we'd go to the studio, they'd film it, and we want to welcome the Phi Gams from North Carolina. So Saturday night, we'd be back at Fraternity House watching ourselves act the fool on TV. But my question is, when Murnick sold out, or Crockett sold out to Ted Turner, was that the immediate end of Dorton Arena? I mean, I know we have the Carolina Cougars there, and then we have what happened at the State Fairgrounds occasionally.
Is the building basically vacant all the time now?
So, your first part, there is a spot in the documentary talking about WRL and its importance to helping sell out Dorton on a weekly basis. So that's definitely in there. As far as that, it wasn't like an immediate loss. The sale was 88 to WCW. They were still running up until 93. It wasn't on a weekly basis. Sometimes it was monthly at that point. So you start seeing that it was slowly starting to fall off. There was one last event in 93. It stopped for 2 years, one last event in 95, and then it was over into 2016. As far as from a wrestling perspective, you started seeing slowed up from there. But there were other things at Dorton Arena, like a Prince concert at one point, or other concerts that were there. You mentioned the Ice Caps, I believe. The name of the hockey team was there, and the Cougars.
Roller derby.
Yeah, roller derby, that was there. So Cougars were more so 70s for ABA.
And these days, our understanding is we did reach out to the Dorton people who manage it while we were working on the film. It sits empty most of the time. It's used, there's a couple of events there every year. Obviously during the fair, it's full now. That's where they put all the local food these days during the fair. But yeah, for the most part, it kind of sits empty, which is a shame considering what a great space that building is. But it is sort of difficult for like a large concert or something to run due to the nature of the size, but the acoustics are terrible. It's kind of a hard building when you've got Carter Finley or PNC across the parking lot these days.
How many times did it totally get out of control where you guys really got mad? Because when I was a kid, it looked like some people really got mad and they were
Personally, I've seen it happen a couple of times. I only wrestled for about 4 years, but a couple of times I've seen that happen. Back in the day, there are certain stories of things that would happen maybe in locker rooms, but when you got to the ring, that was there's a certain level of professionalism that has to be there because you have to have the show. But there might be situations where I've heard of situations where maybe somebody is hitting somebody way too hard in a way that could possibly hurt them, and so somebody would give them a receipt to let them know, hey, calm down a little bit.
Or hit them with chairs.
Or hit them with a chair.
Hit them with chairs.
But if that
was like, oh my God.
those types of things with weapons and all that, like the other person is okay with that. And so there are ways to, I don't want to give away all the sauce, but there are ways to hit people with foreign objects to where you don't have to knock them out, but it does hurt very much.
Can you all talk a little bit about the piece of the documentary that shows the architectural and how the fellow passed away in Atlanta?
Sure. So that was actually one of the kind of biggest surprises for us in the research was actually learning about the building itself. And we spent a good amount of time in the film talking about the building. It's known for its architecture, and it is very architecturally important and has been copied the world over. And we've heard that it influenced the building of the City Opera House, and it influenced all these other buildings that have been built since. But one of the aspects that we focus on in the film is how the designer of Dorton, the architect, his name was Matthew Nowicki, who's Polish, and he had just come through World War II in Poland, and as one of our experts in film puts it, he saw fascism at close range, and he really believed that architecture was one of the ways to make a more progressive democratic society. And so when you look at Dorton, if you look at a picture of it or you see it in the film, one of the things you'll notice is there's no columns. It's a wide open space. The actual arena space is completely open. And that was very intentional to create a space that literally brought people together. We now take that for granted when we have arenas and we have all these other things, but at the time, that was actually the goal, is the farmer's kid and the scientist's kid and everybody else are going to be in one place on the fairgrounds, which is a touchstone in an agricultural state, and it's going to bring everybody together. What was interesting for us, having done the wrestling research, is that's what wrestling was. When you look at, and there's some of the photos that you saw in the trailer, it's the most diverse crowd, all ages, all backgrounds. There's stories of North Carolina governors being in the crowd and having popcorn thrown at them. I mean, you had everybody in this place. And so for us, we sort of felt, and we think that the film kind of backs this up, that wrestling achieved the kind of spiritual impetus for Dorton, as well as the the kind of marketable show space. It also achieved that goal of bringing people together. Wrestling was one of the ways that it did that, which was a surprise for us and something I think is a really cool aspect of the story.
And to piggyback off of that really quick, the stories I get from both sides of my family, a lot of the times where my grandfathers were going to, they were born in the 20s. And so they saw their share of racism, and their times going out in public with the family that I heard about that wasn't a specifically black space typically was wrestling. And so that's where they felt they could go without judgment, without anything happening to them, or any jeering or things like that. There was still some of that would happen, but those were places where they also felt like there's people around them that would kind of protect them a little bit. Hey, like, none of that here. We're here to watch this.
So when I saw you guys in the Scuttlebutt, I was real excited because Mid-Atlantic wrestling was my life between 1970. I mean, I could put you in a suplex right now. Let's go, man. Put you in the thing before. Anyway, I loved it. Superfly, Jimmy Snuka, Wahoo McDaniel, Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair. Who was y'all's favorite wrestler?
For me, growing up, I was born in '86, so I was really enthralled with Sting and Bret Hart and those guys. I grew up hearing about Buddy Landell and Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes and guys like that. And I was able to see the tail end of a lot of those guys' careers, but my first favorites, Sting, Bret Hart, Ultimate Warrior, those are the ones that really captured my imagination.
Yeah, and I'm very similar growing up in the 90s, so it wasn't until I was older that I went back and looked at a lot of the Mid-Atlantic stuff. And retroactively, it's people like Dusty Rhodes is somebody who, to this day, just go on YouTube and look up Dusty Rhodes stuff and just listen to that guy talk, and he could sell you anything in the world. Like, he's just the most incredible speaker and performer, and it's amazing to see what people like him, Stephen Sting at times back then, Ric Flair, all of those people have retroactively just been some of my favorites.
Ric Flair was the best. Space Mountain,
unreal.
Space Mountain.
John, how do your tights fit now?
That's good.
He still believes it's real.
Talk about the show. So it was going to be like, 40 minutes? And so at minute 10, you wanted to have this element in it, and then the next element, this guy beats up this guy, but then he's got to come back. And so how was it scripted out?
In terms of like an actual wrestling show?
Yeah.
That depends.
So there's a lot of different ways. The word script is kind of icky a little bit because that's more of a modern WWE thing. A lot of what would happen is like what's the term is like call it in the ring. So you show up and figure out I'm going to go against Cliff tonight. The promoter wants me to go up clean, which means to win clean, no cheating or anything like that. And we'd be at separate parts of the locker room. The referee would go back and forth. We'd have an idea where we wanted to go, but we'd make it up while we're there, inside of the ring.
Would you say it's your turn to beat me up, and then I'm going to beat you up next?
Yeah, so there's something that's called wrestling psychology. I don't want to give it all away, but basically there is a way to structure a match to make sure that the good guy looks really good, and then to give him like any movie, something hard to go through so you can have that big comeback at the end to get the crowd up together. So there's kind of like this natural progression that you go through, and two trained individuals can go through that without talking. The scripting parts kind of came in more so with WWE and national television and bigger productions, because now we do have to hit certain time limits. This match can only be 5 minutes and 30 seconds because we have to get to commercial break. We have to hit this camera, things like that. So I would say scripting is more of a new thing, but traditionally there wasn't somebody writing down all this stuff. It was two guys kind of making it up on the fly.
You mentioned prearranged and you mentioned Bret Hart. So to me,
that's sort of the most famous, the Montreal screw job, and what that, it sounded like a bad thing, but with him and McMahon, didn't that just help the sport? I mean, make it, like you said, it broke down some of the walls that, but there's an agreement that who's going to win, but if somebody doesn't want that to happen in the ring, then I guess it's a mess, right?
It certainly can be, and just to give some context for Montreal, the incident he's talking about was there were two guys having a match. They had agreed to how it was going to end, and the ending was changed without one of the guys knowing it. And so he was actually beaten legitimately, not knowing that was going to happen, and it ended up creating a kind of a pandemonium in the wrestling business. The funny thing about wrestling, and you see this in the doc too, is it's a very resilient business, and it's a business that's based on promoting. And so they were able to take that incident, to your point, and actually say, okay, well now people know that something real happened. They can believe in that thing that they know to be real. So now we can work everything else around it to our advantage, and they're going to believe it no matter what. And that's the thing that still happens to this day. A friend of ours, C.W. Anderson, who's in the film, the way he puts it is wrestling isn't fake, it's fixed. And the difference is, even with everything that we all know, as Chris being a wrestler himself, me being a lifelong wrestling fan, having been in locker rooms to make this movie, knowing how every element behind the scenes works, we can still watch a wrestling show and still get fooled like you're watching a great magician, because it relies on taking what you know to be real or what you think to be real and changing everything else around it to use it against you. And so it still works even to this day, even on the most hardcore fans, that psychology still works and is as exciting as it's ever been.
Well, Chris and Cliff, thank you so much. They're from one of our members' organizations, and maybe that will drive you to show a little more time.
There will be a big Tar Heel story tonight. We show a lot of Tar Heels, but Tar Heel fans and Wolfpack